We are now going to briefly highlight the teaching of the Church on this topic, the care of creation. We've heard what the Old Testament has to say and the New Testament. And we have gleaned some of the principles from there. But again, just to refresh our minds, we just highlight again the three principles of the Church which are taken straight from the Bible. The first one, which we refer to, God is creator. He created the visible world in all its richness, diversity, and order. And all are interdependent. Each has its own particular goodness and perfection, but there is a solidarity among all creatures. We are intimately connected with one another and with life systems and the ecosystems of the planet.
And principle 2, the human person is superior to all other earthly creatures, being endowed with intelligence, free will, and an eternal destiny. The dignity of the human person is rooted in his or her creation in the image and likeness of God. Hence, nature is not to be put above the dignity of the human person.
Having been made stewards of creation, human beings must act responsibly. Nature must not be reduced to be a mere instrument to be manipulated and exploited. The greater man's power becomes, as a result of science and technology, the greater the need is to ensure proper application for humanity's progress and not for humanity's degradation. Hence, it is important for scientists to truly use their research and technical skills in line with moral principles and values, which respect and realize in its fullness the dignity of man. And our responsibility for caring for creation extends to future generations. We need to ensure the viability of the earth for them. And this responsibility comes down to what the individual can do, to local communities, to states, and to the international community.
And programs of economic development must take into account the integrity of the cycles of nature, because natural resources are limited and some are not renewable. The needs for economic development must be balanced with those of environmental protection.
Another principle, the care of creation, it demands collaboration on an international level to control any activities that have a negative effect on the environment and to protect the common good. And any of these collaboration protocols should be expressed in a binding juridical framework. And indeed, that framework should include sanctions for breaches.
And concern for creation implies that we should actively work for the integral development of the poorest regions of our world. The option for the poor means ensuring that proposed solutions to environmental problems do not end up in consigning millions of people to permanent poverty, while enriching even further privileged individuals and nations. And this is particularly emphasized in Laudato Si. This principle, which can be called distributive justice, challenges rich nations, which have been responsible for most of the pollution over the past 150 years, to provide adequate compensation for the damages caused to the environment. And this is the so-called polluter pays principle.
But also, a change of lifestyle and mentality is required. To build up a just society, it will mean making important changes in established lifestyles in order to limit the waste of environmental and human resources, thus enabling every individual and all the people of the earth to have a sufficient share of these resources. These new lifestyles have important components: the quest for truth, beauty, goodness, and communion with others, and should be the factors in determining consumer choices, savings, and investments. These lifestyles should be inspired by temperance, sobriety, and self-discipline at both the individual and social levels. In a word, each person or group should take responsibility for action on a personal or local level. We are talking here about the principle of subsidiarity.
And a spiritual response will accompany the change of lifestyle and mentality. The fundamental orientation towards the created world will be one of awe, respect, and gratitude. The world, in fact, will lead people back to the mystery of God and to understanding His creative action. Without Him, nature is emptied of its deepest meaning. It is left impoverished.
There are signs of hope. And among many signs of hope, we just mentioned two. An important agreement, the European Union Agreement of October 2014. The European Union pledged a 40% carbon emissions slash compared with 1990 levels. And this is to be done by 2030. They agreed on a target of generating at least 27% of its energy from renewable resources. And they agreed to improve energy efficiency by 27%. Now, it's fine to agree and set the targets, but there has to be accountability. And a lot of questions are raised about how they are being enforced. In Ireland, we've had our problems. For example, forest cover is at 10%, one of the lowest in Europe. And there are signs of hope and promises that there will be a package and a forestation scheme to have 100,000 acres extra by 2020 under trees. And there will be compensation for loss of income during the maturation of the timber crop. Another sign of hope is, of course, the Great Paris Agreement of December 2015, the World Agreement. And here there are just three important elements to this agreement. To keep global temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial times, and to bring it even further down to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So to try and limit the global warming. To limit the amount of greenhouse gases emitted by human activity to the same levels so that the trees, the soil and the oceans can absorb naturally, beginning at some point between 2050 and 2100. Third thing, they agreed to review each country's contribution to cutting emissions every 5 years so that they can scale up the challenge. And fourthly, rich countries will help poorer countries by providing climate finance to adapt to climate change and to switch to renewable energy. That's a sign of hope. There's a lot of difficulties on the way. Pope Francis himself has weighed in with the encyclical Laudato Si on the care of our common home, published on the 18th of June 2015. And he focuses on what he calls integral ecology. And this means connecting care of the natural world with justice for the poorest and the most vulnerable people. He states that it's only by radically reshaping our relationships with God, with our neighbour and with the natural world, can we ever hope to tackle the threats that face us today and that face the planet in our time. He is in favour of science. He insists that science is the best tool by which we can listen to the cry of the earth. While dialogue and education are the two keys that can help us, as he says, to escape the spiral of self-destruction which currently engulfs us. And at the heart of his reflections, the Pope is posing the question, what kind of world do we want to leave to those who come after us, to the children who are now growing up? And he says that when we elaborate the answers, it calls for profound changes to political, economic, social, and cultural systems, as well as to our individual lifestyles.
We have listed a few signs showing hope that climate change can be managed and mitigated. As Christians, we are people of hope, and our hope is based on Scripture and on the teaching of the Church. We know that creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and obtain the glorious liberty of the children of God. We know that the whole of creation has been groaning in travail until now. And not only creation, but we ourselves.
And of course, as Christians, we know that it is through Jesus Christ that all things came into being. Not one thing came into being except through him. So by his death and resurrection, he overcame the powers of evil, sin, and even death itself. It is in him that we find strength, in him that we are saved. It is his Spirit that helps us in our weakness.